guys. Welcome to the Cultivate and Keep podcast. Today it's me, Corey, and Dan. He's back on the show.
Mr. Dan.
Yay, Dan.
The first repeat guest.
The first repeat. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, he's the only donor, so we kind of have to have him
I
back
thought
on.
you had two.
We have to appease
Well,
him.
you're like the main real hitter,
okay.
you know?
You're the only VIP.
Yeah. So we got to keep our sponsors, keep them entertained. So
Keep him hooked.
Anyway, before we jump into the content, we want to make a quick announcement. Wanted to remind you guys of our favorites page. So cultivateandkeep.com/favorites. And you can go there to see some of our favorite resources. It can be apps, books, other podcasts. Just really any tools that we find helpful. We want to share it with you guys. So if you have not yet, go check that out. Also wanted to keep announcing that we are going to continue interviewing just seasoned and wise people on our podcast. And this is another episode of those. So be on the lookout for those. Other than that, I think we are ready to rock.
Yeah. And feel free to...
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
You said seasoned and wise. Why did you interview Phil Ortiz?
Ooh, shots fired.
Phil, what do you have to say? You're going to have to come back just to be able to answer that clap back. No, and also if there's anyone else that you think that we should have on the podcast to interview and to talk with and to learn from, feel free to message us on Instagram, email us at cultivateandkeep.com.
If you want to be on the podcast,
If you want
reach
to,
out.
yeah, make your case.
Yeah.
Open to it. All right, Dan, you ready for this?
Yeah, hey, I just want to say that
Yeah.
that I've been listening to your guys' podcast now for, I don't know how many episodes I listen to. I'm about 5 behind right now. And it's been great fun. Part of me is old guy, roll my eyes. Who are these young punks thinking they know anything about anything? But it has been fun. And sometimes I laugh because I think you guys should be more prepared. and I think if you'd have the answer to that, if you just looked it up and did a little research. But it's been a lot of fun. I think you guys are doing a good job.
Thank you.
With a just having a fun topic that's real life stuff for young men your age to know something about and to work on it. So keep up the good work.
Thank you.
I like it. I think it's a good deal.
We're just figuring it out as we go.
Mm-hmm.
Just sometimes on an episode, it's like we're just going to leave it at that because we don't know. And that's why we bring on smart people like you to come help us answer it.
Yeah, I think we also want to be clear. Like we don't want to come across as like we are two 24-year-olds with the answers and with the standards. I think we're mainly just talking through ideas, talking through our thoughts, and we're kind of like he said, we are learning and figuring it out. We aren't the standard, So wanted to re-announce that.
But thank you. Glad that you're still listening.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it.
And that it's valuable. So today's episode and today's kind of topic and content was sort of just to give like a little preface, it was sort of the brainchild of Monique and I going through the Bible this year. And especially early on, you're going through books like Genesis and Exodus and Numbers. And it's really, early on in the Bible, but also early on in humanity and a lot of kind of things that men and people are experiencing for the first time. And so naturally, we had a lot of questions, and a lot of questions that we couldn't just Google or that we couldn't just figure out on ourselves. Going through a concordance or a dictionary or trying to look at the original Hebrew, language. So just a lot of stuff that we couldn't figure out, and eventually we got to a pile of questions that we just figured, what? Why don't we just bring on Dan and we'll have him answer it for us instead of bugging him, one question after the other. Hey, Dan, another question. Hey, Dan, another question. So we're mainly going to be focused on a lot of hard questions in kind of the early parts of the Bible, and like Genesis and Exodus, I think is mainly where they're focused. But the goal here is to not necessarily answer the questions, but to address them and to get a better understanding of them and sort of the context of them, because there are a lot of things you have to sort of read in between the lines in the Bible. And so, Dan, you were the first person that we thought of. And we thought, if someone's going to answer these questions, it's going to be Dan. So you're our only hope. I hope you don't disappoint.
Yeah, we'll see. Some of these questions are unanswerable.
Yeah,
so
that's just the nature of it, right?
That's the nature of the beast, yeah. One thing we have to know is these are ancient documents. These things are written beginning 3,500 years ago and finished 2,000 years ago. They're really old stuff.
Yeah.
And we're talking about incredibly ancient cultures that and they're speaking about things that were happened probably 3,000 years before Moses wrote them down.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be dealing with people and cultures and things they did that we have no idea where they're coming from sometimes.
Right.
And we think, oh, God took this book and wrote it for me. Well, yeah, but he really wrote it for an ancient Oriental culture and not a 21st century American culture. And we have to try to understand that ancient Middle Eastern Oriental culture to really understand what's going on. And sometimes we just can't.
Yeah. Well, I have a question that brings up a good point because, one I want to get to, so remind me if I forget to ask again, but I want to get to sort of your process of how you came to learn or, go about kind of answering these questions that you have as you go along in the Bible. But also, I feel like if the Bible is God inspired and it's infallible, then, why wouldn't it be maybe for like an exact also like more easily understandable for someone today than it was when it was originally written? Like, wouldn't God have the foresight to say, well, people are going to be reading this for thousands of years. I should probably have this written in a way that's understandable in all times and all ages.
Yes, but I think that's impossible even for God. Because again, God deals with specific people in specific times. And so, that's flippantly saying impossible for God, but these are specific books, specific letters or histories or whatever written for a people in a specific time for specific purposes. And we can certainly draw great principles out of them. But if our time is different than theirs, then and the language is different, and it's 3,500 years ago, it's gonna take us work to find out what God was saying to those people, so we can draw out of that and say, so therefore, what is God saying to us? For instance, I'll just pick a simple little one in some of the laws of Leviticus, which are case studies for that culture then. A simple one is if your bull goes and gores your neighbor's bull, you got to pay for the bull or whatever it is. Well, I don't have a bull.
You don't?
Right? No,
What's wrong with you?
My neighbor doesn't have a bull.
Really, in Lakeside, you don't?
It's a little surprising, honestly.
No, and my neighbor doesn't have a bull either. So what do I do with that? Well, clearly the principle is that you got to be responsible for your stuff, and you're responsible for what your stuff does towards your neighbor's stuff, right? Yeah. Whatever that is, whether it's your kids or your car or whatever. So the principle is there, but you have to dig into the culture a little bit to pull the principle out.
So if my car gorges Jeremy's car, then I have to buy Jeremy a new car.
Especially if you were driving your car or you didn't put the emergency brake on or that kind of stuff. Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
Cool. No, that's good. That's good. And so, but before we get into some of the specific questions and the things that we want to address, and we'll just I think we have maybe 7, 8, or 9 kind of topics that we wanted to cover. But I would love to know how did you find answers? Where did these answers come from? How would a normal 23, 24-year-old guy like us go about discovering this for ourselves?
Yeah, unfortunately, you have to read and study. That's just the way it is. Ugh. Yeah. Now, of course, I have a master's degree in I'm a master's of art theological studies, so I'm a theological master.
Wow.
So that was a lot of study. But read, and just continue reading and study. It's a lifetime study. I'm a more than 30 years older than you guys, so I've spent a lot more time reading. And you were talking earlier about you and Monique are starting to read through the Bible, right? Well, I've read through the Bible maybe 10 times, right? And the way I do it, the way I'm wired, is I start in Genesis, just read through the thing, and then I start over again and read through it. And so I get it's for the way my brain is wired, I get a better idea of how it all fits together because I've read through it so many times. And when you say Isaiah, in my mind, I say Isaiah, okay, no, he wrote, roughly 750 BC. Then this was happening in the history of Israel, 750 BC. I get it, and I know Micah was a contemporary of his, and I know that what the Assyrians were doing at that time and what happened in northern Israel. So I know the history and whatnot. And so when you do that kind of stuff, it begins to all fall together.
Right.
And when I see a strange thing, I say, what in the heck are they talking about? Well, just do research on it. And they already know some of the history and begins to go together. So it's just study. That's all.
And when you say study, I mean, read, I feel like sometimes you could just read the same verse over and over and over again and just maybe not going to make any more sense than I did the first time.
Yeah, because it's not a verse. It's the verse is.
Right.
Again, if I read Isaiah, well, I should be reading, or I should have read in 2 Kings where Isaiah would have fit in, so I know the history that Isaiah is writing about. And so it makes more sense. Now, I don't think it's legit as a 21st century American to grab a verse out of Isaiah and say, oh, this verse is God wrote it for me. No, he didn't. He wrote it for the people Isaiah was talking to, 2,700 years ago. Now that verse may mean something to you, but God didn't write it for you, in a sense.
So God doesn't have plans to make me prosper and how does it go?
Talking Jeremiah
29:11.
Yeah, that's a favorite one. It means for me, no. God was actually talking to the nation of Israel. Does that mean God does not have plans for you to prosper? No, of course he has plans for you to prosper. But that verse wasn't written for you. That was written for Israel in 600 BC.
Yeah, okay. Do you have any, favorite resources or like things that you turn to when you need like something extra, to go to or somewhere to look?
Yeah, there's an old guy saying this is the internet is pretty magic, but it's not full of truth necessarily. So there's some real good resources on the internet, but because of the way I was trained, the way I brought up and pre-internet stuff, I have a lot of commentaries and whatnot, and I'll take 2 or 3 of those. And then if you know who the author is of the commentaries, you know whether you can trust them more or not. And because of their theological bents and twists. And I use those a lot, but then I'll look things up on the internet too, and then compare them to commentaries and work my way through that way. And again, the biggest thing is letting the Bible speak for itself. If the Bible talks about something, asking the question, is there some place else in the Bible the same type of thing is talked about, and then compare them? And boy, you can really come up with some truth that way instead of taking one little verse out saying, this is it. Well, there's other verses that might talk about that topic too.
Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting. Okay. Yeah. I want to get the names of some of those commentaries afterwards.
Okay.
And for everyone listening, you can go to cultivateandkeep.com/favorites. You can go to the books section and look for the commentaries, and those will be Dan Deyling stamped approved.
Yay.
Boom.
Cool. Okay. Well, why don't we jump into the first one?
Okay. And again, these are questions from Corey and Monique primarily.
Okay. So there's, thousands of questions that you could pull out, even just from, what's crazy about Genesis is that it's such an insanely rich thing to write about, like God creating everything that we know and see today and that we've come from. Mm-hmm. But there's only a few chapters on it. You know what I mean? It's there's so much that you could dig into. And so anyways, again, these are questions that were on our minds, but we thought were good enough to ask publicly.
Yeah. And before we jump into that, there's so much you could talk about, holy smokes. But Genesis 1 through 11 is prehistory. That means it's before written material. And starting with Genesis 12, you begin to jump into history where we begin in some of the very, stuff with Abraham starts in Genesis 12. We begin to get written history that can corroborate a little bit about Abraham. You can start putting stuff together. But Genesis 1 through 11 is prehistory. Yeah. So it's all based on oral traditions and stories that were certainly handed down, and now my beliefs handed down from Adam to his kids, and they were passed on. And Moses collected those stories however he did. He grew up in the courts of Egypt, which has the greatest libraries at that time. And so he learned a lot of these things, and then Genesis is put together by Moses. The first 5 books of the Bible are actually put together by Moses.
Interesting.
And of course, in my belief, they were inspired by God, putting them together in accurate ways also to fulfill God's plan the way he wanted to do it.
Yeah.
But so Genesis 1 through 11 are prehistory.
Okay. So that was one of the questions that we wanted to address was who wrote Genesis, and if we don't know for certain, how is it credible? I think for you, it's probably we had some of these written down. I think it's on page 2.
I got it.
Okay, cool.
I got it.
He's a pro, dude. So, how do you know that Moses wrote Genesis or kind of compiled it together and all of that you just said was just totally new information about it would make sense that Moses grew up with Egyptian libraries because he, grew up, he went into the little basket and then the Pharaoh's daughters or someone else found him, and totally butchering history right now. But where'd that come from?
Yeah. There's interior evidence in the Bible that Moses wrote Genesis. There several times in the first 5 books of the Bible, Torah, several times Moses is referred to as writing down the law. Several times he's referred to as writing down where they traveled in Exodus. This kind of stuff is where they're wandering in the desert. Several times in the Old Testament, the Torah is referred to as the book of the law of Moses. So in the Bible, it talks about Moses having written these first 5 books of the Bible. And there's no external evidence that contradicts that. There's some philosophies that do. You know, one theory, well, I'll just leave it alone because that's getting all in the weeds of theology and who cares, right? But the Bible says basically Moses wrote this, all right? And there's nothing really to contradict that.
Yeah, so there's several places where that's sort of indicated or that would be viewed as true as like
and Moses is the most likable choice anyways, because he grew up in the courts of Egypt and was trained as a an educated Egyptian prince.
Yeah. So how when did Moses live in relation to, there's a huge time span in Genesis, but essentially I'm wondering like how far after kind of all the things in Genesis happened did Moses write it? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, Moses died probably, and again, this is probable stuff. He died probably in the vicinity of 1450 BC. Roughly, really roughly 1450, 1440, 1430 BC, and so he probably wrote this stuff while in the wilderness. Okay.
Because what else do you do?
Because what else do you do when you're wandering around the desert for 38 years after you've said, "Oh, they're too big, they're too scary," right? And he wrote it during that time probably. But when did Genesis happen? When did Genesis 1:1 happen? We don't have a clear detail on that, and some people know for sure. But the Bible doesn't give us a clear exactly when that happened. Yeah. I'm a young Earth creationist. I believe that the Earth is under 10,000 years old. I think there's good evidence for that, which we don't want to get into all that stuff right now.
Ooh, that's a big rabbit hole.
I know. So again, Moses was clearly taking oral tradition and compilations, and perhaps there was some written stuff then. We don't know. Nothing that survived history, and compiling them together and putting them together. And Genesis is a remarkable document. The first chapters 1 through 11.
Yeah,
there's nothing like it from ancient history. People talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh and some of the Babylonian creation myths, and they're nice things. But if you compare them to Genesis, they're tawdry in comparison. Genesis is so much fuller and so much less fanciful, fantastical, if you want to put it that way. Than
more realistic.
More realistic.
Yeah.
And I believe the Holy Spirit guided Moses' hand as he did it.
Yeah. Well, what a cool thing! Like Moses being in the wilderness, and also that being part of God's plan of like. Yeah. Hey, you're banished to the wilderness, but now you're going to write, the five of the most important, books of the Bible, and it's going to be, talked about for ages and ages and ages, and that's pretty gnarly.
And also saying Moses wrote it doesn't mean that other people didn't add little pieces here and there. Certainly at the end of was it Deuteronomy? At the end of Deuteronomy, it talks about Moses' death and what happened after his death. So clearly, Moses didn't write that part.
Yeah.
Right. So there were some additions and whatnot, but Moses is a primary authorship. And what does that have to do with credibility if we don't know who wrote it? The credibility of any document in history is not in the authorship; it's in the document. Is the document itself cohesive, coherent? Yeah. Is its historicity testable? And what we can test in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the things we can test have always been shown archaeological wise and whatnot to be accurate, actually all through the Old Testament. I know some famous archaeologists have said that archaeology has only shown the Bible to be accurate in its history. And further archaeology, it will only make it more accurate or show that it is more accurate. So the credibility isn't in who did or didn't write it. The credibility in how the sources speak for themselves.
And that's due to largely consistency across copies from different various places and time periods and other holders of those copies, to where you can kind of lay them over one another and say, what are the differences? And largely they're very, very consistent as sort of what you mean
pretty much.
Yeah,
it talks about reliability of documents, but things like let's just say they I'm trying to think of something at the top of my head, but let's just pick on the Assyrians, as they dug up the palace of Ashurbanipal, one of the great Assyrian kings, and found a library there and began tearing into things. It showed us that the 4 or 5 chapters in Isaiah that speak specifically about the Assyrians, every Assyrian king is accurate. The way they're accurate, what they did is accurate, and so you can say, Isaiah knew what he was talking about. And it's just remarkable.
Yeah.
Those kind of things.
Yeah. On a separate note, I feel like archaeology is just so like I couldn't even imagine discovering something ancient, and then especially being like a Christian archaeologist. If you're a Christian archaeologist and you're listening, we want you on the podcast because
Cool.
What a gnarly job to, have discovered something and then cross-referenced it with something else, historical or biblical, and then seeing like, wow, this really lines up. Like the story about Jericho, always blew my mind about how, it's crazy. How could the walls fall in and just from shouting and
or out?
Or out. That's right. It's out. I need to check my facts. But then going back and looking, well, that's right.
Got him.
Ouch. But then going back and looking and saying, oh, this actually happened, and we can see very clearly that why would the stone lie this way, and why would they build on top of it, and just mind blowing stuff that you wouldn't see anywhere else. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So let's jump into the first question had, which is in Genesis 3, and I believe it's verse 1. But essentially, this is, again, very early on in humanity. It's God has just, he's created the earth and all kind of the animals, and then he's created man. And now it's sort of the first kind of tale, the first story of man's interaction with God and with man's interaction with each other, and also with other things in the garden, like the snake, or quote unquote Satan.
The snake.
Yeah, which is also, the serpent. Another question. It's kind of a two-part question, but the first one was, I guess, who is the serpent? Is it Satan? And what is he doing in the garden?
Yeah, a couple good questions. Now, again, you're talking about things that we can't answer completely and fully.
Yeah.
But it's real clear. I'll just read Genesis 3:1. It says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made." What can we get out of that? One, the serpent was made by God. It was one of the creatures God made. All right. And it was crafty or subtle or cunning. It's an interesting word. And what do you do with that? Because the serpent was one of the beasts God had made. It was a creature. It wasn't stamped in the image of God like Adam and Eve were. But it seemed to have more, I don't know, conscience? I don't know, conscience is a good word. Intelligence than other creatures. It's not sure. It's kind of weird, isn't it? And there's not a lot we can say. There's not a lot that's in there. Now, certainly Satan used the snake, and now we're just kind of totally speculating. Does that mean that the snake somehow was able to rebel against God and allow Satan to use him? Maybe. Was Satan able to take a creature and use it for his own purposes? Maybe. It's hard to say, right? It is strange, but what was clear is the serpent was created by God.
Yeah.
And there was a little more to that. What does it mean he was more crafty than the other beasts? Don't know for sure, and it's not clear. But that's about it. And Satan clearly used him, as you see in other verses in the Bible. It talks about Satan being there in the garden. So Satan used this creature to talk to Eve. And the amazing thing is, Eve doesn't appear to be all freaked out because the snake's talking to her.
That's what I was wondering, because, when Nick and I were talking, that was sort of what I thought, and just probably from things I remembered from, your class and being in high school or our previous conversations. And as animal lovers, unashamedly, we're both kind of questioning, is that a possibility? Like, were animals talking in the garden, or are they going to talk in heaven?
Yeah, good question. Let me throw something else out. This is totally speculative, right? and this is where did Adam and Eve pre-fall have the ability to commune with the creatures better than you and I do?
Yeah.
Now, did they talk in human terms? Probably not. But but did they understand the creatures better? I would say probably. And it wasn't until after the flood that God put the fear of man upon the creatures. It was after the flood. So
weird.
I know. So and again, we're talking it so speculative out here. Now
that's okay. That's where we want to go.
Yeah, I roll my eyes at cat whisperers today and that kind of stuff, right? I got to be careful because I got cat people hating me forever, which
Jeremy,
which I don't care particularly. But yeah, so there's some interesting. Maybe Eve and Adam communed in a way with the creature, so it wasn't that big deal for her to understand what the snake was saying, thinking, talking, communing with her. I don't know.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why she wasn't freaked out.
Yeah. Well, also, sort of, it also begs the question, of how and why was Satan in the garden. And to my knowledge, there's only a couple verses. I think one of them is also in Isaiah, where it's kind of written about and talked about how and why Satan, got to the earth. And it's, again, this is a really muddy kind of thing. You can answer this much better than me, but my understanding is that it was before man, at least, Satan and the third of the angels were cast down to earth from heaven, and that was the first, rebellion against God.
Yeah, there's no timetable.
Yeah.
We don't know for sure. Now, I know, and I'll step on toes here, but in Ezekiel, in Isaiah 14, Isaiah 14 talks about son of the dawn. I forget the exact phrasing, but the son of the dawn, it talks about you who are in heaven. And Ezekiel is actually a lament of the king of Tyre, but it gets real out there. It talks about more than a human king. And it's hard to know for sure what's going on there. Some people say it's clearly talking about Satan. But it doesn't mention him at all. And often in ancient literature, kings are seen as almost heavenly beings. So it might just be big hyperbole, right? So you can't directly say this is Satan. This is Satan in Isaiah. This is Satan in Ezekiel.
Right.
But perhaps there's a foreshadowing there. Now, Revelation 12 certainly talks about Satan waging war on the earth, and there's so much symbolism in there. But when did this actually happen is not sure. Did it happen way before the creation of mankind? Don't know. Did it happen soon after? We just really don't know.
Yeah.
When did Satan rebel in heaven? We just really don't know. But it appears, it's clear that he was allowed to come to earth and begin to wreak havoc. And then appears to be the first time he started wreaking havoc.
Right.
Okay, so was that was before Adam and Eve were created? Is that what you're saying?
What we're saying, kind of, we don't know.
We don't know for sure.
We
maybe.
don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
But before they were created, Earth was formless and void, right? Is that what it says?
That's clear. Yeah.
So we're speculating that Satan and his angels were casted before Adam and Eve.
Right, like sometime between when the earth was created and when man entered
Maybe.
the earth. Yeah.
Dude,
Maybe.
this stuff twists my mind so much.
Or it's okay to not know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
There's a particular,
So how much can you know?
Whatever the Bible says. There's a particular man I know, and I'm not going to say names here, who just knows it all, right? And in my
Is
class,
he related to you?
No.
Oh.
I was going to say that. God, that's funny.
Is he your son?
No. Well, yeah, he knows everything too. But in my Bible class, whenever we're talking about things like this, I say, "Well, so and so knows," and they all laugh because the kids know him. But
that's funny. It's interesting to me that. Well, again, now this also begs the question, at least in my mind, of sort of getting back to, well, like, did God know that mankind was going to sin?
of course he did.
Yeah.
Of course he did.
Which is, I don't know. I just feel like it's a hard pill to swallow a little bit.
Well, okay, only because we're human, and
Yeah.
no, I clearly, if God is God, right, he knew everything that happened before it happened, but
Yeah.
he still thinks it was worth it. It wasn't like, oh crap, Adam and Eve messed up. What am I going to do
So
now?
where do we get that?
There
that from?
There was none of. He was surprised that Adam and Eve messed up. He knew they were going to, and before any of that happened, he already had a plan. Well, in the person of my son, will rescue them. And he figured all the pain and hurt and whatever is worth it, and he would pay the price for it, and it was worth it, so that eventually we would all be his. And he figured that was worth it. You and I may struggle with that because we don't get it, but of course he knew. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's just a really like mind-boggling thing.
I hope it's encouraging too.
Yeah, it is encouraging. If obviously God has, I don't know, it brings further context into God works all things for good, and he knows and is in control, and it's all kind of being orchestrated in ways that we don't even know or see.
Yeah, we can't possibly. I mean, that's the whole book of Job is all about that. you read Book of Job and you say, God, you're so unfair to Job. This is not cool. And Job kind of says the same thing in various ways through the chapters. And then near the end of the Book of Job, God shows up to Job and basically tells Job, you don't know anything about nothing. About the simplest things of creation, which we read and we say we don't know those either.
He just roasts him. He just goes off.
But he doesn't roast him. I don't think that's the point. I mean, you can take it that way, but I don't think that's the point. The point is, Job, if you can't even understand the basic things about creation, which you can't, then how can you understand my bigger plans about everything? And Job says, oh, I get it. I've heard of you now. I've seen you, and I repent in dust and ashes. And I think it's a lot of the same things. God would let us know if we could get it. But I don't think we have the ability to get it at this point in many, many deep things.
Wow. I never thought about it that way.
And are you okay with that? I'm okay with that because God is really God. He's, mindless, mind-boggling beyond us. That's who God is. If we can figure God out, he's not very much of a God. He's just somebody we can figure out in our own brains.
Yeah. That's a really, I feel like that was really powerful. Just like God saying, look, if you can't understand even the things that you see and can feel, like how could you possibly understand my plan and like, all of everything that's going on and everything that's being orchestrated, like that really is on a whole other level. Yeah. And most people maybe box God into I can figure out God by even like the things that we see, or like kind of like a creationism a little bit, or evolution of well, can we prove that God is real? And it's like, look, even if you had all of the facts, you're still probably not even going to be close. And that even isn't even comparable to how God is orchestrating history and mankind and everything spiritual going on. So there's a lot of insight there. In tandem with the snake and the serpent and man and Adam and Eve is the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. To my knowledge, both were sort of positioned in the middle of the garden, as far as my understanding goes. Feel free to correct me on that. Why would God put them, in close proximity together? And I guess also, like, what are either of those trees?
I'm not entirely sure what the tree of life is because, he sends them out of the garden afterwards so they don't eat from the tree of life and live forever. Yeah. Right? Did they not eat from the tree of life before? He doesn't tell them they can't eat from the tree of life. So not sure where that is entirely, but the tree of knowledge of good and evil is just simply a tree. And an interesting way of looking at it is in the garden, you always say, why did he put that thing in the garden, dang it? Well, he put hundreds of other trees that he said yes to and one that he said no to, right? Yeah. And that's the kind of way of looking at life. God says yes to a lot, but we always want to go to the no's. Right. And that's something wrong with us, not something wrong with God, correct? I have a Far Side cartoon that I love that's up on the wall of my office that shows two people standing on the street getting ready to cross it, and behind them is a sign that says no juggling chainsaws. Right? And they don't see it. And one of the guys says, I got this funny urge to juggle chainsaws right now. And kind of the point is we want to do what says no instead of the 100,000 things that say yes, right? Yeah. But God had to pick something. He wanted to test mankind, wanted to give man the opportunity, and he knew we were going to fail, right? Give us the opportunity to show him that we loved him, and love always requires a choice. If there's no choice, there's no love. There's just what instinct or something, right? Yeah. And God thinks that he's created a universe, and he is a being that there's love because it's three persons in one being, and they're characterized by constant relationship and constant love of each other. He wanted to share that. And so he makes us, stamps us in his image, and we have to really show to ourselves, because we don't have to show him anything, but show to ourselves that we have the ability to love and be worthy of him in a sense. And so he has to make an opportunity for us to choose not to, if there's going to be a choice to choose to. And he chose to do this thing called the tree of knowledge, good and evil. And basically it was a tree that said, are you going to let me, God, choose for you what is good and evil? Or are you going to say, no, I want to do it myself and decide what is good and evil? And it's a symbol, and I think a true symbol, but a symbol of who's going to be in charge and who are you going to love. And we chose to love ourselves more than God. it's that's all it is.
Yeah.
And in the person of Adam, even then, every one of their descendants, except maybe Jeremy, have chosen to love ourselves more than him. And he knew that was going to happen all along. And he was, I wouldn't say cool with it, but he thought it was worth it.
Yeah.
In the long run.
Yeah.
So what an amazing thing.
Yeah.
I always thought it was interesting how, like, the thing that tempted Eve, Satan using the serpent, was he says, is it really true, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, that God said that he doesn't want you to eat of this tree because then you'd become like him? And it was the temptation of, is God holding something back from me?
Absolutely.
And then I could be like God, or I can be my own God. That was the temptation to rebel against that. It wasn't like, I don't know, like stealing something or like lying or, I don't know, any of the kind of normal sins.
But it is in a sense. It is in a sense because the tree of knowledge of good and evil says, I get to decide what is good and what is not good. I get to decide, as opposed to God gets to decide. So whether it's even now today, if it's a lie is I get to decide whether it's truth, not God.
Yeah.
Any particular sin, I get to decide, not God. So it's the basis of all sin is the exact same thing. Who gets to decide what brings life to me?
Yeah, that is really fascinating. But in essence, I mean, as far as like the trees go, we don't have. The only other thing I wanted to mention was, maybe this will spark kind of something from your memory, but in Revelation, when God is describing, or when the author is describing kind of what heaven's going to be like, and like the New Jerusalem, it talks about trees and the fruit of the trees.
Yeah.
Is there any connection there, or resemblance maybe of kind of what it could possibly be? Like, what is the purpose of these trees? And
I'm frantically trying to think of some witty, good response. And no, there's a river of life that runs through the whatever that means entirely. And I think that you could probably say that's similar to the tree of life. It's God is the fountain of living waters. God is the fountain of the tree of life, or the foundation of the tree of life. You could probably draw parallels there. One of my favorite verses in the whole Bible is Jeremiah 2:13, I think. But God says, I have two things against my people. One, they have left me the fountain of living water, and have hewn out for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. And just it's such a clear picture of me doing things on my own, trying to build things that hold water that just can't. And right over there is a fountain of living water, just saying, hey, I'm over here.
Yeah.
And so tree of life, fountain of living water, a river of water that runs through the New Jerusalem. I think they're all parallels.
Yeah. It's just us trying to do things the hard way.
Yeah.
Unnecessary pain and struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny, like, most of the Bible that we read, like, we aren't supposed to read it like just this passage, like, in context. We have to like apply it to our life and think like outside of that one verse or that one passage. I don't know why, but whenever I read Genesis, like, I don't do that. I just think of like Genesis in itself. And a few minutes ago, you were like talking about it and saying like you were paralleling that with our life today, and I thought that was interesting because for some reason I don't do that with Genesis. I don't know why. I don't like apply it to my life today. I just think strictly like at that time.
But your old history stuff.
Honestly, which makes it hard to read. Like, makes it, we were talking earlier, like, so Corey started reading the Bible this year. You started
for the first
to
time.
read the whole Bible in January, right?
Yeah.
I started like late February, and we were talking how it's hard. Like, it's hard to really those first few books to get through it. And I think for me, it's because I'm looking at it as like it's just simply history, which it is, but like it applies and it's like living and it's real.
Yeah.
And when you look at it in that frame, it's a different perspective,
Hey, can I give you a hint on reading the Bible?
Please do.
There's lots of stuff it's legal to skim over. Okay?
Don't.
The first 8 chapters of Numbers.
I don't have a
totally
problem
legal to
doing
skim
that.
over. Like some of the laws of Leviticus, totally legal to skim over. You don't have to read about the 14th waving the bread law that, holy smokes. So that's legal. Okay, just so you know. Cool.
It's good advice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Skim the Bible.
I went through a few chapters very quickly. Just to get to where I am now, which is still
improved your average of chapter per day.
Definitely, yeah. I caught up pretty quick when I fell behind a couple of weeks. So one of the other things we're focusing really kind of tightly on like this really kind of, I mean, pinnacle of man and man's relationship with God. But it was also, we were wondering like how is Adam and Eve tempted to sin before there was sin?
Yeah.
You know, and not like, we understand that temptation and sin are different things, but just curious, you know, how they had never sinned. And so like, how are they tempted to sin?
Well, let me throw it back at you and say, how was Jesus tempted to sin, but he never sinned?
Yeah, that was my first
Same.
thought.
Well, you know, I think you might be thinking too deeply about it. I mean, you've been tempted before and not sinned, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've answered your own question.
Well, no, I just feel like it's interesting because I've sinned and I've been a sinner forever. And so, of course, I'm going to be tempted to sin because that's what I do as a broken, fallen human being. But how could Adam and Eve, still being perfect and in right standing with God, be tempted to sin?
Well, I have to say because they have desires just like anybody else, and those desires could be abused. You know, it says there in Genesis 3 somewhere, it says that Eve, well, I might as well read it instead of just trying to paraphrase it, right?
Good idea. Good idea.
Somewhere in there, it says, verse 6 of 3:6. So the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, and the tree was to be desired to make one wise. So she saw those things, and those weren't sin yet, but those are desires in her, and they were temptations. And however long this whole thing with the serpent might have lasted, might have been days and days, and who knows how long it lasted.
Yeah.
But finally, those desires, she decided to act on them. And she didn't have to, right? That's still, she didn't have to. And she probably had less compulsion than you and I do because we're used to sinning. So it was a monumental event in her life to choose to step from a temptation into sin, almost more than you and I.
Yeah.
Right? Because she'd never done it before. But I think temptation is just real, and this time she chose. You know, I'll speculative again, right? Someday we're gonna get hit by an airplane or something and die. And I hope I hope it's an airplane because that'll be quick.
Hit
right?
by an airplane.
Yeah, low flying jet just
easy way to go.
turns me into mist. That'll be the best way to go. Okay. Anyways, and I think for the first time in my life, that sucking grab of sin won't be there. You know, the Dan Deyling will stand up and it won't be there. That's gonna be a liberating experience. But does that mean free will disappear from me? I don't think so. But I think my free will be overwhelmingly want to choose for God, having known that the other choice is death, 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 death. And I don't think she had the opportunity to know that yet.
Yeah.
I mean, she was clearly self-deceived and deceived by the Satan that, hey, this second choice might bring life to me.
Well, that's what I wonder a little bit. I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking it before and then I forgot it. But doesn't the Bible say somewhere that in heaven, once we're restored, and because Jesus has conquered death and He has redeemed us, that we will no longer have the desire to sin?
I think so. I wouldn't know exactly where it says that, but certainly the impression is there. Yeah.
So there's a difference between the state of where Adam and Eve were spiritually and the state that we will be in.
I think so to some extent. Yeah.
In heaven with Jesus.
Because Adam and Eve, I think if it hadn't sinned, would maybe have actually physically died at one point. I think, maybe not. This is a little speculative again. I mean,
they would
the earth have just been populated by humans and no humans ever died?
I was going to ask, how would it have been different?
Yeah, I know. I can always retreat to what Allison said. You can't know what might have been and what would have been, right?
Right.
And that's always a safe place to go, but it's fun to get speculative sometimes. Would they have, let's just say instead of died, because that's a sinful term, right? Have passed on to stay with the Lord in heaven, whatever that means? Maybe.
Yeah, because God did give them the commands of be fruitful and multiply before.
Yeah, rule and reign, subdue the earth before sin was there.
Yeah. So people keep being created,
and
all of a sudden, every square inch
eventually, the earth would be filled, right?
Yeah.
What would go on from there? Don't know.
Yeah, interesting.
I mean, maybe because the universe is so big, we would have learned how to move out into other planets.
Whoa,
or whatnot. Maybe
trippy.
Don't know. Speculative.
Okay. A lot of speculation going on here.
Yeah.
Well, let's ground ourselves again
Okay.
and move on to Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel.
So Cain and Abel were some of the first offspring of mankind.
Maybe the first offspring.
Maybe the first. I think the first, right?
That's
yeah.
what it says, yeah.
Yeah, okay. The first. And
Okay, I have a question.
okay,
This
go
is
ahead.
still prehistory, right?
Yeah.
It's weird to think like Moses chilling in the wilderness and God's like, oh, write this, oh, write that. Like, like.
No, or there were maybe they already had oral traditions that they passed down, and so these were stories that were well known among the people, perhaps.
Perhaps.
Yeah,
Perhaps.
'Cause, I mean, your dad has told you stories,
Mm-hmm.
and you're gonna tell your kids some of your dad's stupid stories.
I'll tweak them a little bit.
Yeah, of course. And that's the Holy Spirit came in and made sure it was accurate. But this was an oral tradition of people too, right? This
Yeah.
is before writing, before YouTube, before pictures. So the oral traditions would have been a lot more serious and kept.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. Just a really quick comment that I feel like everyone always talks about how today we know more than we ever have.
Yeah.
For some reason that never really settled with me. I feel like that's because there's a lot that we probably
We have access
know.
to more.
we have access to more,
Yeah.
but there's probably less known about history. Naturally, as time goes on, we are, because we're living here today, we know probably less than most people did about history before, because there was other libraries or oral traditions or things passed down, and we're so far from it.
Maybe there's certainly more to know
Yeah, that's
Right.
true. There's
today than there was back then.
That's also true.
Yeah.
There's more that you can miss out. Okay. Anyways, so we're getting into Cain and Abel, and we kind of dropped into the story in Genesis of Cain and Abel both offering a sacrifice or giving an offering to God, and for some reason God didn't like Cain's. Why didn't he?
I don't know. You have to ask God.
Okay.
Yeah,
I have to wait.
The Bible is not super clear on that. We can get a hint of it, maybe. It says that the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. And so Cain was very angry, and his face fell. And then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted?" And out of that, I can draw a little bit that whatever Cain did, it wasn't done well, right? It wasn't done well. And Cain's response was to get arrogant and angry and upset. So out of that, I draw there was something in his offering that wasn't wholehearted, that was more maybe Cain-centered, unlike Abel's, which seemed to be more wholehearted. And so God had regard for Abel's and not for Cain, whatever that all meant. And there's some speculation out there about Abel's was animal and Cain was from the ground, and so an animal is more important than the ground. That's just nonsense. And God created everything. But there's something along there where I think Cain was a bit more arrogant, or just wasn't well done, whatever that means entirely. Because God says to him, if you do well, things will be fine.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I feel like the word choice is interesting. Like he didn't have regard for his offering. It wasn't, and again, this is a little bit subjective to interpretation, but I feel like it wasn't that he didn't like Cain or that he was like, ugh, like what the heck is this? It was just like, this isn't pleasing to me.
Yeah, it was, you get the impression it was half-hearted.
Yeah.
Or 3/4 hearted, or 7/8 hearted, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, on a side note, but it's crazy. Like, I just wonder what that dialogue was like.
How that dialogue happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't say like God said. It just
does
says,
say God said.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
But did he say it directly to Cain?
You get that impression.
Yeah.
Yeah. You get the impression that very, very early on, God was more direct with the people than later on. He gets a little less able to understand, in a sense.
Yeah.
Right?
And we humans maybe get a little bit more arrogant and less able to perceive. And I think sort of where that question came from was, it seemed like from face value that Cain didn't have like a fair chance, right? It was like kind of going into the offering.
Yeah, where do you see that? From the scriptures, where do you see that?
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like you have to like read it really well to understand that it wasn't that God like already had, contempt for Cain and didn't like him, but it was that what Cain offered, he didn't have regard for, but it didn't have anything to do.
Yeah, because it seemed to be half-hearted. That's the impression. Right. If you do well, will you not be accepted? If you don't do well, right? If you do things half-heartedly, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is contrary to you. But you got to rule over it. I mean, he's basically giving Cain a great opportunity. Hey, he's not saying you're bad. He's saying do better, and things will go great. Otherwise, sin will master you. And boy, we can read that. That's true, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really scary. I mean, that verse too, right after that, where he says, like, since you be careful, like, if you don't kind of listen, like, he's kind of like warning, just FYI, just trying to help you out. And then it's very, like sin is crouching at your door. Like, then he is kind of crouching up on Abel to kill him. And it's a little bit ironic in some sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything to add on that story, Jeremy?
No, other than I think that verse is really good.
Yeah.
As you read it out, like simply if you do well, like will not go well for you. I was thinking of this next question before I saw it in the notes, but I was going to ask it, but I'm glad I waited. Where did people in Genesis go when they died?
So Abel was the first to die, I think. Right?
Before Adam and Eve?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because Cain killed him. Yeah. So where did they go?
Well, they probably buried him, and they, the worms go in, the worms go out. They turn into dirt, and well, sometimes you have to look at the whole Bible to get pictures on things. The Old Testament is very unclear as to the state of a person's being after they die. Right? It talks a whole bunch about how a dead person can't praise God because they're not there to praise God anymore. That kind of idea. It talks a lot about that in Psalms and whatnot. But it talks about a somewhat shadowy place called Sheol, which is the place of the dead, and it's not very well defined at all. And it's really not until the New Testament you get a much better idea of what the place of the dead, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if you can say it wasn't until Jesus came that suddenly everything changed. I'm not sure about that. There is that really weird verse in, I think it's Peter, I'm talking off the top of my head right now, where it says Jesus died and went down to hell and led free a host of captives. And it's just, who knows what that means? Nobody knows what that means. I've read lots of commentaries. They're all over the place. Nobody knows what that means.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, I know. Because that's an easy way to go. We don't know for sure. Paul said to be out of the body is to be with the Lord. If you're a follower of God, right? And God says to Abraham believed him, and God reckoned it to Abraham as righteousness, which would give me the hint that Abraham was with God and when he died. So it's really hard to tell. Jesus' death covered all mankind because he was God, so it covered all mankind before and after the actual historical point of his death. So mankind before Jesus died as a man were already covered by his blood. I know that's getting a little weird out there because he was God and he made everything, and he's outside of time. So it's hard to say for sure, but certainly those people who love God and serve God and God reckoned it to them as righteousness were with him, I think.
Yeah.
Certainly by the New Testament, we get a very clear picture. But again, it's not entirely clear in the New Testament either. There are those groups of people who believe that when it says people die and go to sleep, that they are basically out existence except in God's mind until the great white judgment. Then God will will them back into existence. And you can go there. I think it's getting a little weird and out there, but I'm not going to say that's entirely 100% unbiblical.
Yeah. Well, is that where the idea of purgatory or some sort of, quote unquote waiting place is, from or founded?
Yeah,
or?
quote unquote waiting place. Yes. No, purgatory is sorry, Catholics, is a non-biblical state of affairs that comes from the Catholic Bible, because the book of Maccabees, which is an apocryphal, I don't want to get into the theology of that.
Wow,
An
this is
apocryphal
all
book,
new information.
apocryphal book in the Catholic Bible. There's a couple verses there that the doctrine of purgatory comes out of, and we don't need to go into those rabbit trails.
Side note: have you read that book or books like
Book of Maccabees? Yeah.
or the book like Quran? Any other like just religious
Some of them,
books?
yeah.
Okay. I was just curious if you have.
Yeah.
Do you recommend that someone?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Why?
What's the point? Kind of the point is you have. There's a lot of good stuff to read. Why read stuff that is questionable? And I love Catholics, and if I had to become a Catholic or go to hell, I'd become a Catholic. Definitely, I think they're Christians.
So, getting back to like, where did people in Genesis go?
Yeah.
When I say Genesis, also like I'm talking about all. I should have said all before Jesus, essentially, and before Jesus' crucifixion, or resurrection, I should say. But I mean, to you, just personally, what do you think is the most?
Here's what I think. When I think of people like Isaiah, I think of like Abraham. I think of people like Moses. Yeah. I think they were with God, and so if they were, then I think anybody who fulfilled, the requirements of loving God with all their heart or with God when they die, whether it be before or after the act of Jesus' physical death, because it covered mankind for all time.
Well, there's also an interesting, like, tiny little snippet, and I wish there was so much more about him and his life. I believe it was Enoch, who was taken up. Yeah. Like God was just like,
he walked with God and he was not.
Yeah, and it was like, okay, did God just like evaporate him, or like
he was not?
Yeah, like did he die? I mean,
he was not. He was not. That's what the Bible says.
Okay, but
where did he go? He was no more. He's with God.
Yeah,
Isaiah.
Because he had lived.
No, Elijah.
So well?
Elijah. I think it's Elisha. I get the two always confused. Was taken by a chariot of fire up to heaven. He's with God.
Yeah.
Right.
So essentially, it doesn't matter. Like whatever with God means, whether it's...
And that's a good way of putting it, whatever with God means. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And then it's not so far, it's not so different than it would be for someone now in whatever way, we're outside of time and we're with God, which is probably outside of time. It's just not so different than it would be today is essentially what you're getting at.
Yeah. There's this, does Jesus say it? I forget. This is eternal life to know the Father. I think Jesus says it. This is the eternal life, to know the Father. Is that a place, eternal life? To know the Father? Is that a state of being? What is heaven? Is that a place, a state of being? You can really get into some philosophical and interesting weeds running in those directions. It's more than a place. It is certainly a state of being, but it's not only a state of being, it's a place too, because it's going to be a new heaven and new earth, which seem to be physical things.
Yeah.
So, don't know for sure. Certainly the great white throne judgment culminates it all and makes it all come to full realization.
Okay, well, and we're going to, by the way, when we get to Revelation, we're going to have lots of questions. But for the meantime, just to kind of wrap up this whole idea, when someone dies, even, today, 2,000 years ago, whenever, and they're with God, then when God creates in Revelation, the new heaven, and he establishes it on earth, the new Jerusalem, does that mean that people come out of heaven onto earth? Is that like, do they change, places, or like, how does that fit into kind of what this means to be with God?
Yeah, who knows? But
when Dan tried.
when you talk about God, the being of God who created time. Time is something God created. All right. So he's outside of it. He can step into it because he's God, but he's outside of it. It's kind of like, let's say you hold a balloon, and just for the sake of the argument, call that balloon everything God created. Well, God's holding that balloon. He's not in it. He's outside of it. And if we die and leave that balloon or are with God, where are we?
Oh.
And if we're going to go back into that balloon at the Great White Throne Judgment, were we there before or there after or there during? Are we there now? It's all outside of time stuff. And you can get really weird out there thinking about that. So it's hard to say. I mean, one part of me says, if our earthly life is 70, 80, 90, 100 years,
That's
12
years.
That's
hopeful.
Yeah, 12 years, who knows? Whatever it is, and eternity is eternity. Then when we get there from the earthly perspective, time, when we get to eternity, will this little teeny tiny itsy bitsy fragment little part of eternity we lived called Earth really even be significant?
Yeah.
Will it be that kind of dream thing we had? You know what I mean?
Will it feel distant?
Yeah.
Or will it feel still really near to us?
I mean, let's just say that Jeremy, dies in a fiery plane wreck today.
It's hit by a plane.
Hits our plane. and I live 35 more years, and I go into heaven and assume, I'm not going there, I assume Jeremy's going to be there. When I meet him, will it be like we've always been there already? Because we're outside of time in a sense?
Right. Okay.
Weird things to think about.
Okay. It's all trippy stuff, but that's what we like.
Do you think it's 'cause I find it easy to just like not go down this hole, like with all these questions.
That's okay. You don't have to.
And I find when I do, I almost always like frustrated because we just don't know. Bottom line.
Yeah.
And
can you live with that?
Well, what I want to ask is, do you find is it beneficial like for Christians to explore this stuff? Like,
I think it's fun.
It's fun.
I think it's fun because I got that philosophical mindset.
Yeah.
Is it beneficial? I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, but it's fun.
Yeah. Okay. Just curious. Like, is there a right or wrong in exploring
I think
should we not?
No, not necessarily. I think it can be beneficial in terms of it helps me see in one sense, how things in this life really aren't that big a deal. I love God, follow Him, run with Him. The fact that, somebody bothered me is really not that big a deal compared to eternity, right?
Yeah. I feel like it is really beneficial because it gives you that perspective, whereas if you would never, it's almost like a you don't know what you don't know kind of thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of things we ironically don't know, but to get a little bit closer gives you that much more perspective to live much better and to live in a way that's much like if I know that my double-digit lifespan here on Earth is just microscopic in compared to eternity in heaven in my real life, then it changes the way that I live and that I think and that I treat other people.
Yeah.
So I think it is pretty beneficial.
I feel like it's good to do like with someone like Dan, like a guide. It's kind of like if I want to go fishing or hunting, and if I don't normally do that, I'm gonna go with the guide because they're gonna take me to the good hunting spots, kind of show me the tricks. And you're like the master guide, Dan.
The master guide.
Well, I feel like you've said a few things. Like one thing you've repeated is you've talked about like God being outside of time, and we know that, and like we should know that. But I feel like you keep bringing that in, like reminding us of that with a lot of these questions, and I feel like that kind of sheds like light on it. When you kind of think of it that way, it's like God is outside of time. Like the whole question about people in Genesis when they die, like where do they go? Like you said, outside of time, so they are with God, and I think that's helpful. So
yeah,
find a Dan, find someone like
Dan.
him.
Yeah, it's probably much harder to think and explore a lot of these ideas and questions without a guide. So I think that's a good idea.
There's a lot of good
That
reading.
was a
out
killer
there, though.
analogy. Huh?
A lot of good
That
reading.
was
I'm
that
really
was fire,
impressed.
dude. I'll give you that.
We found the honey hole with
C.S.
Dan.
Lewis is my guide.
Is it?
Yeah.
That's good. You're mine. So.
Okay, cool. C.S. Lewis is way smarter.
Yeah, maybe we should look to C.S. Lewis more. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, switching gears a little bit. Who are the Nephilim?
Yeah, you're in the weeds now.
Yep, we're really getting in there.
Yeah.
But hey, this is a question that came up.
Yeah.
And so we have to have some sort of answer.
Okay, the only thing we know from the Bible about the Nephilim is they were giants. They were bigger than average humans. What were the Nephilim? It's one of the strangest stories in the Bible is that Genesis chapter 6, where it says the sons of God were attracted to the daughters of men and had kids with them. Had kids, and these offspring they had were the Nephilim, who were the mighty men of old and men of renown. And it's right before the flood, so there's clearly wickedness involved in there also.
Yeah.
What in the world are the sons of God having being attracted daughters of men?
Well, first of all, really quick,
Yeah.
like the translation doesn't help very much in our understanding of it, I feel like, in this case. But what are the sons of God?
Yeah.
'Cause that's a little bit confusing, because I feel like it's sort of the opposite of what it's trying to communicate, in that they were, sinful creatures.
Maybe.
Right?
There's two. Okay, first thing, nobody knows.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
except that one guy at the school who knows everything. Nobody knows. The two main lines of thought of the sons of God are fallen angels. I have a lot of trouble with that, because angels are entirely different beings than humans are, and they're not corporeal. They don't have human bodies. So how and why would an angelic being be physically attracted to a human body person? That just seems like it's out of category things. Okay, so that's just weird. I have to see that.
Yeah.
So what are the sons of God? I've heard it said that the sons of God could have been sons of Seth, of the godly line, and the daughters of men could have been a symbolism for daughters of the Cain line who are not godly.
Okay.
That kind of makes sense, except their children were mighty men of old and renowned. There's something special about them.
They're giants.
Yeah. What's up with that? Was it a mutation? I don't know. Who knows? The Nephilim were certainly giants. It says in Numbers 13:33 when the spies went into Jerusalem, not into Jerusalem, into the Promised Land, when they were checking it out before they were moving in, they said, this is horrible. The Nephilim were in there, the sons of Anak, who were big people, very, very big people, and they were of the tribe of the Nephilim.
Yeah.
The descendant of Nephilim were there. So there was some kind of, I'll just say mutation, I don't know what else to say, that these people were big. And that's about all we can say. It's one of those weird stories. There's a few weird stories. Another one in there in this question. There's a few weird stories, and that's one of the weird stories.
Yeah.
That nobody knows. Really nobody knows.
But we know that they were gone after the
weird.
flood.
No, they weren't gone after the flood, because there was somehow.
Wait.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think about there was. Well, how could the sons of Anak be of the Nephilim when they were way after the flood, right?
Oh,
but
right.
the flood
right.
wiped everybody except Noah's people. I'm not sure. I've never
And
actually
where are they today?
considered that. Yeah.
Or,
Well,
I don't
Andre
know.
the Giant was one of the Nephilim, of course.
Maybe.
Do more prep, Dan.
yeah, do more prep.
No.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, that's one of those not sure's. Interesting stuff.
Do you know off the top of your head who Anak was? Like when they say, from the line of Anak.
No, I haven't researched who Anak actually was.
Okay. Because, just from my memory, it doesn't seem like he was from like the traditional kind of biblical line of people. So he was sort of.
He wasn't Israel. He wasn't Jewish people. He wasn't Abraham's
exactly.
line at all. No.
Yeah.
No. He was Canaanite.
Okay.
Amorite, Canaanite. And it's a true, I have to look it up where there's Goliath and his family, the giants of Gath, were they of the Amalek tribe? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But there were several of the giants of Gath, right? There were several of Goliath's people.
Right. And who were supposedly
Bigger.
9 feet tall
Bigger,
and
yeah.
much stronger. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, really weird story there. But whatever happened increased lawlessness and increased wickedness upon the earth.
Yeah.
To the point where God said, I got to. Well, in His plan, He said, I'm going to take these people out.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. That gives a satisfactory answer. Like I said, as much as we know and as much as we can know, that's what we know. How could God regret, quote unquote, making man? Or why would He be sorry for making
there's a couple things here. Is that one of the things is that we can only speak of God in human terms. We can't speak of God in God terms because God is way above and beyond us. And so the terms regret can't mean, dang it, I messed up.
Yeah.
From God's perspective, right? Because He didn't mess up. He has a plan. And this was part of His plan. Knowing sinfulness would increase to a certain point, He was going to bring a flood in. and deal with it. This is part of his plan. It wasn't a surprise to him. Dang it, shoot, I got to go plan C now. I guess I'll bring a flood and mess them all up. No, that it was actually part of the plan. Let me ask you this. Can you be sorry for something you know is going to happen? Can you have regret for something you know is going to happen bad?
Yeah.
You can, can't you?
Because you can see.
You can see, you know the results. You know, it went to this line, and I wish it hadn't. I wish it hadn't gone this way. I wish they had chosen otherwise. I regret that they chose otherwise, and now I have to do this, right? And I think that's a line we're talking about, that kind of thing. Again, it can't mean that God figured out he had messed up and he was sorry that he messed up, right? That's not part of God's character.
Yeah.
So I think it means more. I mean, God's emotional. This whole phraseology in that is a very emotional attitude spoken in human terms. I'm sorry, I regret that I need to do this, but it needs to be done. I think that's the way to look at it.
I have a question that just popped up. You said like God had a plan, right? It's all to his plan.
Mm-hmm.
What about like today, like current time? Like what is it that we're doing that's a part of God's plan? Like I feel like in the Bible, like so many things happen and it's documented. But like what's going on now that's a part of the plan, you know? Like it might be a weird question, but does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, I don't know entirely what God's plan is with the nations right now. I don't know. I know God's plan for me is to love him and serve him and you know, and love those around me and honor them and do the best I can to reflect the light of God to them, right? And I know that is overall God's plan for everybody in every nation, right? In terms of what are the ebbs and flows of God's plan through history right now, I'm not sure. You can only do that by looking back and say, oh, it appears God was working here. Oh, it appears God was working here. History today is different than biblical history. You know, it says in where does it say? All Scripture is inspired, and it's in 2 Timothy. All Scripture is inspired, and you guys probably know this one better than me. Is inspired and profitable for teaching, and that's really not the verse I'm looking for.
No.
But the idea, biblical history is different than other history. Biblical history, the purpose, the specific reason biblical history was put in was to show God's working to the point where Jesus would come and redeem mankind. And then we're done with biblical history. I mean, the plan has been enacted. Now we are to live out the plan that has already been enacted. And we won't know how that is until we get hit by that plane or until the final great white throne judgment. So is God working? Absolutely. Can we see it all the time? Nope. Of course, they couldn't see it all the time in the Bible either.
Yeah.
Right? It's only afterward it's written down. And, we see what God is doing. You know?
It's like, you know, one day will there be like Holy Bible like revisited, you know?
No, there won't be.
Like an updated version?
No, there won't
That'd
be.
be funny. I had that picture in my head of.
But the biggest question is, do you trust that God is working and things are working out for his to his the greatest good they can be, given the fact that humans have free will and they often abuse it? Do you trust that? And I choose to trust that.
Yeah, and that's also relieving in a lot of ways, right? In that you don't have to put it all on yourself, and that you can trust in God even when you don't have everything.
Mm-hmm.
So to wrap up that question and answer, it's more of our interpretation of that word and how it's used in that context, and maybe a better understanding for what was meant was that it grieved God, that God,
I think so.
It's hurtful to know that these things are going to happen, and that, you know, this is the way that it's going to go, and it's going to be painful for mankind.
Yeah, and in the same way, this says in 1 Samuel when he says, "I'm sorry I made Saul. I regret that I made Saul king." I think it's the same concept. Yeah. Because nothing we do surprises God. That he says, "Oh shoot, I wish I hadn't picked that one."
Right. It's not like a different whoops.
Yeah, it's not a whoops. It's a more emotional response, I think.
Okay. Interesting. Why did Noah curse Canaan? Yeah. And subsequently, and this is part of the same story, but he gets drunk. And is that right or wrong? Again, we're sort of, I don't know if there was laws or commandments off the top of my head back then around drunkenness and alcohol or, you know, mind-altering substances, but
I think you got to read the rest of the story too. There, the story is Noah got drunk. Says he was a man of the ground. He made vines. He got himself drunk and naked, And he was passed out drunk and naked, evidently, right? And his son Canaan saw him and went and told his brothers. Now, but his brothers, it says they took a robe and backed up to their father and laid the robe on him and covered his nakedness. And what's the difference in those two? One, Canaan was being dishonorable to his father, and the other two being very honorable to their father, right? So whatever Canaan said and did, the impression I get is he was mocking, look at Dad, the big old drunken naked guy over there or something. And it was as a dishonorable thing. And so that's what Noah cursed. He said, Canaan, you have no honor. And spoke into his life truths about him, and then he spoke into the life of the others truths about them, which that's what it means when it cursed him.
Okay.
Yeah. It had to do with drunkenness. So it had to do with dishonoring his father.
Okay. So 2 follow-up questions, but one, what does it mean to curse someone? Like what happened, or what was the significance of Noah cursing Canaan? And then once you're done with that one, was it bad that he got drunk? I mean, I'm just,
the Bible clearly tells that drunkenness is not good for you. Yes,
Okay.
It was bad Noah got drunk. Yeah.
So still a mistake on, because reading it, it's like, oh, well, Canaan kind of got the short end of the stick. Like his dad got drunk and then he ends up being cursed by his dad who got drunk. Like it seems a little bit backwards.
No, yeah, but that's not the point. The point is Canaan dishonored his father, not that his father was drunk. Was his father dishonorable being drunk? Yeah, maybe. But it's not his son's job to publicly call out their father's dishonor in a sense, right?
Interesting.
It's certainly not the way Canaan did. And again, we're talking about a bit of ancient culture here, that there might be a lot more going on that we know about. Maybe when Moses wrote that, they knew a little bit more about it because they understood it more. So there could be things that are completely missing in this story. All right, but when I don't think when they said the cursed Canaan that Noah spoke a demonic thing into Canaan. I don't think that's what it means. I means he called out the stuff that was clearly in Canaan that wasn't cool and saying, this is what's going to happen to you, son. Right? Just like in a very similar way when King David showed publicly with the Bathsheba and other times that he was allowing sexual sin to just be all over him. God said to him, now this sin you're going to have sexual sin in your family forever. Is it a curse? Yeah, in a sense, but it's speaking something that's already there, and this is what's happening. That kind of idea.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, a curse is really, at least in like today's culture and society, the place that we live and the people that we interact with, a curse is like a very kind of like witch, kind of, it has a bunch of like strange kind of connections to it. And it seems a little bit of like a foreign idea for a godly man to curse someone.
Yeah, well, I don't know what to say about that.
But it's different is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, we're not Harry, but he wasn't Harry Potter.
No.
Okay, so.
It's not bewitching Canaan.
No.
He's
he didn't have a wand out, I don't think.
No, okay.
No, okay.
Well, we don't know. No,
we don't know for sure, but it's true.
No, it's probably safe to say he did not have a magic wand.
Jeremy's looking at us saying, you geeks.
Yeah, what's the point?
Okay, here's one. What's with all the incest? There's Abraham and Sarah. There is Noah's family. There's Lot and his daughters.
There's Tamar and Judah. There's lots.
There's
and
several.
Lots. Yeah. One thing we often do through not a good reading of the Bible is we assume because it's written, God approved of it. We just assume that, and that's just flat out wrong. These are real histories of real people, and unlike any other kind of ancient literature, the Bible is real clear on this. It writes down what really happened, and writing down what really happened doesn't mean God approved of it, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, God does not approve of incest. At least, well, let me get back to this. Abel had a wife, and his wife was his sister, because there were no other humans out there. Right, and so yes, in some, especially ancient cultures, you married members of your family, right, and don't know what to do with that entirely, but I know that as the human family has gone on, and there people try to think about why are there incest laws now? Well, part of it is mutations, and this is just genetic stuff that we're a lot more messed up, especially if the world is very young. We're a lot more messed up genetically than Abraham was, and us marrying our near cousins or sisters now is a lot better chance of recessive. I may be getting these wrong. Recessive genetic problems to be increased because we're doubling the probabilities. Again, we don't know cultures a whole bunch. We don't know everything going on there. But again, just because it's stated, I might got a little weird there, but just because it's stated in the Bible doesn't necessarily mean God approved it.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. I've never thought of that. But it's true. It's just history of people.
Yeah.
And
and sometimes the horrible parts of history are just kind of matter-of-factly repeated. I mean, said this is what happened. And you think, what? But that's what happened.
Yeah. I feel like that's one of the important things. Like, this is where having the knowledge and the wisdom of knowing, which parts of the Bible are historic or are poetic or are prophetic or, kind of like, what was the purpose of this and what type of literature is this? And then how do I read it because of this is really important, because it's sort of, factual. It's historical in a sense of it's recounting things that happened, and it's not necessarily a commandment, right? Where it's like,
right, go out and be incestual with your
right.
sister. No, it doesn't.
Nowhere does it say that, and it's not like a parable either, where it's sort of figurative. It's just very literal in the sense of what happened.
Yeah,
but it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't mean that God approved it or that we should repeat it. It just means that it happened. And I think it is also interesting too, like with all the ones that we named, I think that if you read it like afterwards, you would see like the consequences even
trouble.
of that. Yeah. And all of them, it didn't kind of, it wasn't like, okay, like God made an exception for them. It's like, no, they paid some really hard things, and bad things did happen to them, or, there were things that happened. Essentially, it wasn't like you just kind of let it slide either. There was always justice in that situation.
Another classic thing of that is slavery. In biblical times, slavery always happened. If you conquer somebody, they became your slave. That's just the way it was. Not just in the Bible, but all the cultures of those times. It's just the way it was. So the Bible talks of slavery rather casually. If you have a slave, and then it says how to treat them. I mean, the Bible's real clear on, and is really ahead of the times in terms of the time periods written, saying how to treat slaves, how to treat them well,
Yeah.
But just because slavery is mentioned in the Bible, is this what's going on? People say, oh, the Bible's horrible that it condones slavery. No, it doesn't condone slavery. It talks about, here's where slavery is, it's going on. How are you going to treat your slaves? Because they're there.
Yeah.
You're talking about real people in a real time, in a real culture. How do you deal with them? All right. And some of these things are the same story.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
No, that makes sense. So I can assume that it's sort of the same story or lesson when we're looking at other issues like polygamy.
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, where it's not necessarily condoned by God or approved or encouraged.
Well, I would say it's certainly not condoned by God, because God makes it very clear it's not. But nonetheless, people did it. People were involved that way, especially political figures, because that's one of the ways you seal treaties is you give wives and daughters away.
Yeah.
Which is totally uncool, but that's what was done. And it causes a lot of trouble too.
Yeah. Polygamy, even like that's one of the ones where you can really see, like with, we did an episode on it with Leah, when Jacob marries and then
I remember
her father sneaks in,
Leah instead of Rebecca. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Rachel.
Rachel. And then I think he marries once or twice more after that
the maids.
Until he gets to Rachel. But like, it doesn't end up good.
No, the sons are always fighting. It's just horrible. Yeah.
Yeah. And the same thing with Abraham.
Abraham and Sarah and Hagar.
Yeah, that's one of the big ones, because that's where Ishmael was the son of Hagar. Or was it?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
And surprise, surprise. Sarah says to Abraham, I can't have a kid. Take my hand, maybe have a kid through her. And by the way, there's some interesting archaeological studies that show that happened at that time period here and there. It's interesting stuff, but we're not go there because it's a weird story.
Right.
And then of course Hagar has a kid, and then she says, basically her attitude is towards Sarah. Haha, I have a kid and you don't. And Sarah gets all fired up about that and tells Abraham, I can't believe you did that. And it's like, just bringing in nonsense and trouble and destruction through patterns that God says one man, one woman, and they do other things. And the Bible just clearly says, here's what happened, not God approved of this.
Yeah.
In many things, including incest, including all that stuff.
Yeah. So maybe here's a counterexample a little bit, but with Jacob and Esau and their relationship. Jacob steals Esau's birthright, and then later he also essentially steals his blessing.
Yeah.
While Jacob is on his deathbed. And it kind of seems like he got away with it a little bit. Or like what were
Okay. Yeah,
the
let's
consequences
talk
of
about
that?
it a little bit. Now, clearly it was God's plan that Jacob should receive the birthright and the blessing. That's talked about in the Bible in several places. Okay?
Regardless of the fact that Esau was the firstborn.
Yeah, it was clearly God's plan. All right? That the secondborn in this case should receive the blessing. And it's interesting, often God picks the weaker to do his purposes in the Bible. That's just real clear. And I want to compare that because that was God's plan. And it happened, but there was a lot of ugliness involved with Jacob and Esau. I want to compare that with David, who was clearly God's plan to be king of Israel. Now, David had several times to make himself king of Israel by his own plans, by killing Saul. But David said, I will not hurt God's anointed. And the long and short of it is he received the kingship in a way that brought a lot of unity to Israel eventually. All right? But he could have killed Saul and still been king, and it probably would have caused a lot more trouble. In this case, with Jacob and Esau, Jacob, through trickery and deceit, got the birthright. And it caused all sorts of trouble to Jacob, to Esau, of course, and to generations and generations and generations later, because Esau, the Edomites, and the Israelites forever were warring tribes with each other from then on. It's sometimes of peace, but mostly not. And probably a large part of that was because of the way Jacob took God's plan into his own hands, right? Would God have brought it about without Jacob doing this? Yes, absolutely. And it probably would have been a lot more peaceful. Maybe Esau would have got hit by a little low-flying plane. And then, hey, now firstborn is now Jacob. Everything's cool, right? Who knows? Who knows what might have been? But God's plan is not to be... God's plan will happen, but to do it through trickery and deceit is going to cause a lot of trouble. And it did.
So, okay. Yeah, so God's will was still true. It was going to happen, but it was maybe not the way that he wanted it or intended it to originally happen.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so,
and that's the same with I was talking about just a few seconds ago. The same with Abraham and Sarah and Isaac. Abraham could have said, "Nah, I'm not gonna take Hagar," and Isaac still was gonna come. It would have been a lot more peaceful.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't still have the warring Arabic tribes against
I was going to
Israel
reference
tribes.
that, which is so crazy to think about, where it stems from.
Yeah.
And like that we're still dealing with it today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, it's always interesting because they were godly men, but the way that they the way that they went about God's will essentially wasn't God's plan, or it wasn't the way that God intended it to be.
Or it could have been. It could have been done better.
So remind me, was it spoken to Jacob? Like, did God speak to him saying, "Hey, like my plan is for you," basically, or no?
I have to do a little research. I forget. Did it say beforehand? Because Jacob came out holding on to Esau's heel.
Right? Yeah.
And I think, and I get a little fuzzy here. I think there was a prophecy before that the older would serve the younger. I think
that's right.
But I don't remember exactly where that is. So yeah, I think it was.
Okay, I'm curious, like thinking from our perspective, reading it, like you just said, it was like spoken a few times that Jacob was to receive like the blessing and the favor. But I'm just curious, like in that time, was Jacob aware of that? Was he aware that he was like in a sense like the chosen one, you know, or was he kind of always like behind Esau? Just thinking about.
Yeah, don't know for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a yeah. I never thought about. I knew that was. I don't think I could have articulated it like that. And that.
That's why I get paid the big bucks.
Really, how much? That it was God's will, but the way that he handled it as a man was not the way that God intended it to be. And that could have been done better.
Yeah. And David's a good example of it being done better, at least that one part of his life, of not killing Saul several times when he could have.
Yeah. That is
saying,
super
I will
interesting.
not touch the Lord's anointed. It's up to God to deal with it. Even though David knew he was going to be king. Clearly it was been told him.
And David had to, like, he kind of paid for it a bit. Like, I mean, he was
A few more years
constantly
of running
being-
around and hiding, yeah.
Yeah, he was being pursued. He was living out in the wilderness. He was hiding. I mean, talk about like abandoning everything that you know, or like holding out for something.
Mm-hmm.
Like he really held on to that and like really believed in that to, you know, yeah, okay. Super interesting. I think that answers it pretty well. In a similar vein, going back into Exodus a little bit, but there's just a slight little like phrase that just kind of like caught my eye a little bit. In Exodus 4:24 through 26, there's something about God intending to kill Moses.
Yeah.
What is that, and what's that about?
Again, you pick one of the weirdest and oddest and strangest stories of the Old Testament.
Well, that's that's what's going to be the question.
Yeah, it talks about Moses on his way to see Pharaoh, and God gets in his path and is going to kill Moses. Right? He says he intends to kill Moses, and Moses' wife Zipporah circumcises the kids, and I forget all the details. I should probably look it up, but throws the foreskins at the feet of Moses and says, "You are a husband of blood to me," and God doesn't kill him. What a strange, weird story. The most I can draw out of that.
I just read that,
Yeah.
and I missed that.
Yeah, well, look it up and read it again.
I think
What I can draw out of
What
that,
the heck?
and again, commentators aren't sure what to do with that, but in some way, some significant way, evidently, Moses disobeyed God, and it probably had something to do with circumcision, and it was real clear, and it wasn't one of those iffies. And so God met him on the way to kill him, and I don't know. It's just a weird story. It's a hard story. It's a difficult to understand story. Zipporah evidently understood it, right? And what's going on there? What's the ancient cultural thing going on there? What is the direct disobedience that God felt was so significant so as to possibly kill Moses? Nobody knows for sure.
Okay. Nobody knows for sure.
For sure, yeah.
But again, I think we can look at it with the principles of how we read and understand and know that it was a righteous reason for
God's not capricious.
Right.
There was a clear something Moses clearly did against God that God felt was important enough to take Moses out, and he should bow down and bless Zipporah every day of his life after that because she prevented it.
That's
by circumcising adult males.
I have to go back and read that one again because I mean, I wrote that down to ask this question and I still forgot about. Anyways, super bizarre. Okay, thank you. Why was it? Or again, my phrasing this is a little bit biased already, but Rachel steals Laban's.
Yeah.
We called him Laban.
I know you do. I remember that.
That's why it's so painful for you.
A little bit biased, you know.
You're like, you know what? We're just gonna go with it. It sounds kind of funny. So
she stole the family gods from Laban.
yeah, but she steals.
Yeah. Of course, it's not okay. No.
Okay.
Now there's more to that story, because through archaeology we have found out, at least in one case, or at that time period, where if you held the family gods, you held the right to the family property.
Huh.
And so what might have been going on here is she was stealing the family gods and claiming a right to her father's property at one point. And so that's why Laban chased her for 7 days.
Heck.
Because if this is true, if this is what's going on, you can see why he would chase for 7 days for these idols that he probably could have bought more at the local idol store, right?
Huh.
Probably. But so there's a lot going on there. But no, of course it's wrong to steal the stuff from your father.
Okay.
But there's a lot more to that story than just her stealing stuff. She was being conniving. She was being conniving.
Right. Okay.
She was taken off after her husband, who was a trickster too and conniver, Jacob. And of course her father was too.
Yeah.
Right. Laban tricked her, and she had a right to be pretty upset with Laban, didn't she?
Yeah.
The older sister got her husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And bringing up Jacob too, I forget who was talking about it, but they were talking about the whole kind of persona of who Jacob was, and just kind of like giving some color to his personality and what we know about him, and how he was a little bit almost of like a showman, kind of like a little bit over the top, and it reminds me of sort of like later on when Jacob he has to go to like Esau, and sort of like where Esau lived and resided, and he knew that there might be kind of, or he thought that there might be some sort of like
Esau was coming
blood
with 400 men. I think it was. He knew there was trouble coming.
And so he puts up this big show of like this huge offering and all this stuff, and then when he sees him, it's kind of like not a big deal, or at least it doesn't seem like it. But it's funny to think of Jacob in that way of like he's just kind of a little over the top and like a little bit he's that guy a little bit, like
they were a dysfunctional family.
Very
big time.
And your twin brother too, anyways.
And God still did great things through them.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matthew 12, 43 through 45. So if you're wondering why we're jumping from Genesis to Exodus now to Matthew, it's because I also started reading Matthew along with Genesis, and so that's why this is in here. A little bit of Old Testament, a little bit of New Testament. But it's sort of a bizarre passage.
Yeah, it is.
And feel free to read it if you want to give it a little bit more context. But I don't even know what it means, to be honest, or what to think of it very much.
Yeah. Okay. It's Jesus is talking, and he says, when an unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through waterless places seeking rest, but finds none. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when it comes, it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings with it 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that person is worse than the first. So it would also be with this evil generation.
The reason why it was interesting
it's a weird passage.
Is that last phrase where he says, and that is how it will be with this wicked generation.
Yeah.
I just thought, well, there's something to this because it's for some people, but what does it mean?
Yeah, there's something in here. Are we going to ignore all the unclean spirit stuff, or
No, that's interesting too.
I don't know for sure, but it appears that spirits, demons, like familiar places. They like known places, and they can possess people, and they like it, and they want to be there, and that a person can be cleansed from a demon, and unless they fill that spot in their heart with, I'd say, with God, that demon will maybe come looking again and find the place still there, and so it'll come in and it's, like it says here, bring more with it, which is a worse place.
That was a part that really threw me off. Like 7 more. Like,
Just bring more. Hey, the house is still in order. Let's go and party, boys. Right? There's something in there, and Jesus is talking about how this generation being an evil and adulterous generation. He's talking about signs in there as we go through. He's dealing with the Pharisees and whatnot, and he's saying something about this generation. This generation is worse than previous generations, in the sense Jesus, the Son of God, is there, and he's bringing life and bringing light and bringing beauty and cleaning out unclean things. But he's gonna be gone, and those unclean things are gonna come back. Dang it. Because they're going to find the house not in order because these guys aren't dealing with it properly and not filling it with the right stuff for the things of God. and it's going to be worse for these guys than if Jesus had never come, in a sense, because to cover the analogy, because they've rejected the Son of God, they've rejected the Messiah. So I think that's the whole illustration and picture in there.
Okay. Yeah. What a crazy illustration.
Yeah.
But that makes sense. Do you have anything more on that?
No, it's good.
No, it's good.
Thank you.
Good answer, Dan. Okay, we're wrapping up here.
Yeah.
Exodus 20, verses 5 through 6.
Yeah.
Talks about visiting the iniquity of the people.
Doesn't say visit the iniquity of the people.
Does it say
It does say fathers, yeah.
Yeah.
Fathers?
This is one of the things.
I didn't want to spoil it or give it away.
This is one of the things you should be prepared for. Is you should have these scriptures out ready to read them.
Oh, I can bring it up.
Well, so can I. 'Cause I actually have a Bible here as opposed to your computer.
Old school.
See, I'm faster in your Bible than you are in your computer.
Oh, just click
Exodus
enter.
25:6 says this,
Yes.
that it's part of the Ten Commandments, and you should not make any carved images or whatnot. You shall not bow down to these carved images or idols or serve them, for I am the Lord your God. I'm a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers and the children of the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to the thousands of generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You should always compare those two whenever you bring these verses up.
Yeah.
Okay? But I think it's basically this. It's that children reflect their parents. And when it says father here, but I'd say parents. But when the Laban family looks different than the Royston family, looks different than Royston. The Haynes family, which looks different than the Deyling family, right? Because our ancestors have been different people and done things differently. And Jeremy reflects his father and his grandfather and his great grandfather, and I reflect my father and my great grandfather and my grandfather and all those lines. And so in their strengths and in their weaknesses, right? I just do. And I couldn't help it because I'm in the family and I've learned those things. So if my father was a person who was full of iniquity, I'm going to probably be a person full of iniquity. And I'll probably pass that on to my kids too, because that's the behaviors we have, unless we think really hard about them.
Yeah.
And in the same way, and this is the promise of this verse, if I love God and I honor him, that I'm going to pass that on to my kids, and they're going to naturally do that too, because it's in me. And it compares these to, iniquity of the third and fourth generation, but steadfast love to the thousandth generation. And how cool is that?
Yeah.
So I just think it's family traits. I don't think it's demonic curses that go through families. I just think it's family traits, strengths and weaknesses, and sins and gifts.
Yeah. But and what does iniquity mean? Because that's one of those
we
words.
We just call it sin.
Okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's one of those words that we don't use today, but so when we read it, I'm like, oh,
say sins, say
to
struggles, say weaknesses, say, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Well,
perfect. I'm so proud. Gosh, perfect.
Killing it, Dan. Last question.
Yes.
And that is going back to Matthew.
Which is not in the Old Testament.
Which is not in the Old Testament. No, it's in the New Testament. It's Matthew 22 in the parable of the wedding banquet.
Yeah.
And I already have it up here. It's sort of a longer passage, but it's a parable, and Jesus is comparing, the kingdom of heaven is going to be like, and he says, a wedding banquet. And then at the very end in verse 14, he says, for many are invited, but few are chosen. Mm-hmm. And also just entertaining the idea of the parable as well, but just curious, I don't know, what does he mean by the word chosen? Or how are we supposed to interpret this parable and kind of what to make of it? Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, what does he mean by many are called?
I don't know. That's part of it. He calls all of us, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's God's will. Nobody would be. Everybody will be saved, right? Nobody will be lost.
Yeah.
So
the Bible does say that.
Yeah. So many are called, in my opinion, means that everybody's called by God. Everybody, but not everybody chooses to follow him. Now we could get really into doctrines of predestination and doctrines of free will and go weird in both directions if we wanted to. But I would say basically, God sees our choices. That does not mean he necessarily is pushes all of our choices. We do have free will in a lot of ways, but he can see what we are going to choose, and can say and when all is said and done, say I chose Jeremy from the foundation of the world because he knew Jeremy was going to choose him. Although he didn't compel Jeremy to choose, Jeremy does have at least to some extent a real free will. So in that case, he chose Jeremy from the foundation of the world, but Jeremy also in free will chose God, right? And I think everybody is called. I don't buy into the doctrine that there's only.
Why not?
Yeah, because the Bible, there's a lot of tension in the Bible, a lot of tension, and one of the tensions are we do have some true free choices. Adam and Eve had a free choice to follow God or not. They really did. And yet the Bible clearly talks about God choosing people from the foundation of the world. And those two can't go together very well in our brains, right? Evidently, they do go together better in God's way of thinking. And you'll talk about getting your head wrapped around things. You're not going to get your head wrapped around those two doctrines that are clearly chosen in the Bible. Clearly talked about in the Bible, I'm sorry. So what does it mean to be chosen? I mean, God chose me. But then you ask the question, why did he choose me? Because I responded to his grace sometime? Yeah, maybe that's it. So he chose me as the foundation of the world because I responded to his grace here in my life? I think you can go there. I know some Calvinists are screaming and pulling their hair out right now, but okay. I don't buy into 5-point Calvinism. I buy into 2 1/3 point Calvinism.
Yeah. I feel like a big part of that too is like, well, if that were true, what does that mean? Like, what does it change for your faith and for your life? And
if what was true?
If, that you didn't have a choice and that you were chosen, and, maybe playing into some of the ideas of predestination, it seems less profitable or less ideal, or like it would be more of a stretch, and you would have to maybe even ignore some parts of Scripture to believe that. And so,
well, you got to believe in predestination because it's clearly taught in Scripture. But
not
a choice to follow God or not is also clearly taught in Scripture.
Yes.
So you don't tell people predestination isn't true because it's not. It is true. But it's also true you have a clear, real choice to follow God or not.
Right. So it's one. That's what I mean.
It's when you stand on one of those banks, only predestination or only free will, you get in trouble.
Yeah.
It's when you're in the tension of the river that I think you're in where the Bible is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
sense.
sense.
There's lots of things like that in the Bible. We want it just black and white, and often the Bible's not. I just like the word tension. There's a lot of tension, lots of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And it's not going to be crystal clear sometimes. So when we look at this verse,
a lot of times,
for many are invited, but few are chosen. Then, again, it's not like we can't take this super literally in that, maybe there's only predestination. We have to see it in the context of everything else that we know and observe of other doctrines, other scriptures, and not isolate it.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. That's always the way to interpret the Bible. Let the Bible interpret itself as much as possible.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Jeremy, any other thoughts, questions?
Yeah, a little bit off topic, but I wanted to ask, what was your system for like writing these down, and like where did you keep all these questions? I underline and highlight in my Bible, but it's easy to they get lost, right? So where did you keep all these, and what was your system for that? Yes, for Corey.
Oh, you're talking to me.
As you ignore me. As you were reading through these, right? These pop up.
Yeah.
So, what was your system? Just practically speaking, where did you keep this list of questions?
I just wrote it down on my phone in a note that was hard questions about the Bible.
You gonna write things down on your phone?
Yeah.
Wow, I always use a notebook.
Stick with us, old timer.
You see, I never have a notebook near me or by me. Mm-hmm. And I also
he doesn't believe in paper either.
Oh, okay.
It's not I don't believe in paper.
It's look at this is paper. It's real.
I know. I hate printing stuff.
Might be a silly question I had, but I'm just curious because.
Well, it's a good question because
I know you're very pragmatic, so I just thought.
I wish I highlighted more and wrote more in my Bible, but I just don't have a pen conveniently by me usually, which I should.
What a dweeb.
I use
So I
good,
write
I use
things on my
GoodNotes
phone.
iPad with a stylus. Okay. So
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah. No.
Wow. You're even more advanced than me.
Ooh.
One of those like feather ink pens you use.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The quill.
Quill, that's what it's called.
Yeah. That's my whole system though. I just write down my notes.
Yeah. Silly question.
What a
Okay.
concept.
Cool. Well,
Dan,
shall
this
I
has
take
been
us home?
Yeah. This has been
Yeah, it
fantastic.
was good, Dan.
Fun.
Thank you. Lots of great answers, and I feel like
And a good amount of I don't knows.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing too, is that it's easy reading the Bible alone or even just with one other person, and you come across these things and you have a choice of writing it down or not writing it down. And if you do write it down, then you have a choice of, am I going to look into this, or am I going to research it, or am I not? And then if you do, then it's, well, what if, there's things that I don't know or that I get stuck on, and you have to go to someone else. So there's a lot of people, I feel like, that they stop, way earlier than they should.
Yeah. And you said earlier, 2 hours ago, holy smokes, or whatever it is. You said earlier, how do you know this stuff? And that's just the way you do it. You don't know, and then you do research.
Yeah.
Or you don't, and you go, I don't know.
Right. But not like at the very minimum, it's comforting to know that, like, just to hear someone else in their context and their perspective of this.
Yeah,
like that
absolutely.
And that you don't have to have all the answers, or that it's not all going to be crystal clear and black and white of what it is, but that you can be okay given everything else that you read and research, and leaving it where it is and the conclusion that you do come to.
I felt like it was good to hear Dan say, I don't know a lot. Like, for like a good amount of these, you're like, I don't know. And I was like, oh, like Dan doesn't know.
Or
like,
it depends.
Like, I can say that. I can admit I don't know, was kind of encouraging.
Yeah.
Good.
And it doesn't mean that it's false or that it's wrong or that you're doing something wrong. It's just that that's as far as you can go with it. So
yeah. Biblically, as people who know
Biblically.
more about the Bible, way more than the Bible says about the Bible.
Yes, people like to talk. But thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Our
Fun.
first repeat guest.
Yeah, Dan, keep giving us money, and maybe you'll come back a third time. So
Yeah, we'll talk again in 6 months.
tips for our listeners: if you want to be on, just give us money.
Well, I remember you talking to me about, let's say 6 months ago, that your goal was to be making enough money to pay for this stuff, and you're not even close yet, are
We're
you?
not there.
We're not quite there yet.
But
we're
in all
scraping by,
seriousness, no,
but-
like, thank you very much
My
for
pleasure.
what
Yeah.
you give. It does help. So
Yeah, it's fun.
appreciate it.
Well, that's great.
Well, guys, thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. If you have any questions, if you want to reach out, you can email us at cultivateandkeep.com. You can reach out through Instagram or Facebook Messenger. Other than that, I think you'll see us next time.
All right. Peace.
See ya.